All right, and we're back. Episode 2. Let's do this, Chandler. Um, how was your weekend?
Yeah, it was great. I was running around New York. I'm visiting New York for a couple of weeks now. Um, Explored a lot of Williamsburg, very crypto centric. Walking down the street, seeing, Bored Apes and NFTs. Uh, Spray painted on the side of the street a bunch of buy ETH tags. It really felt like this was a homecoming location for me. It was really interesting and
Yeah,
fun, and just kind of
I'm.
crazy to see the penetration.
Yeah, I'm not there now, but I was in. I've been like in and out of Williamsburg for the past 6 months, and I don't know how I feel about how crypto centric it is. It does feel like like at least the crypto center of the United States. So it's cool. You'll go out to dinner and get a coffee, and you'll hear someone talking about NFTs or how ERC-20s work or something like that. But yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of great teams there, so always a good time. My weekend was good. I went to a bachelor party in Austin. There was a NASCAR race. I'd never been to one before, so we had a lot of fun there. It was hot, but it was a great time. And also exciting in the mail, I got a steakhouse by Dapnode sent to me. So going to be able to have a home staker running, learn how that works. I'm not an engineer, as you guys know, so it'll be a fun little challenge. But I've heard they're very intuitive. Um, yeah, they just use a lot of bandwidth, so we'll see. But why don't we kick
Yeah,
things
if
off?
Justin can get his staker up and running, anyone can.
Exactly. That's that's how we got to show it. But let's kick things off. I think the biggest, let's say the most exciting piece of news. I'm just going to play this as we talk. Is that Do Kwon was arrested? So I guess he was, rumored to have been found with a fake passport from, I forget where, somewhere in the Caribbean. He was found in Montenegro, and I assume he'll be extradited, presumably to South Korea or the United States. Um, yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, it almost, it felt like we forgot about him, and then there he is getting arrested. Good to see that there's some justice and he couldn't escape the Interpol notice, but definitely raises an interesting question of whether, Terra was a failed experiment or outright fraud. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the courts try to prove that. What are your initial thoughts, Chandler?
Yeah, kind of fascinating. He got caught in Montenegro, and I do believe that there is a rather well-attended crypto conference happening in Montenegro as we speak. Could it be that he was attending it and that's how he got caught? I'm not sure. It would be kind of cool if that was the case. But otherwise, I think, to your question, is this fraud or is this some sort of failed experiment? I think he initially started as an experiment, but I mean, even before the collapse, everyone knew it was a bit of a meme machine and a Ponzi and kind of, ridiculous. And he just chose not to listen to better minds. So realistically, I think the concept of it being fraud won't be too hard to prosecute. Looking at the sentiment on crypto Twitter and just the crypto environment in general, everyone seems to be kind of very happy that Do Kwon got charged. And I mean, with a lot of like enforcement actions coming to the forefront at the moment, having the the shining example of fraud outside of SBF, being Do Kwon being arrested, kind of just makes the industry just seem a little bit more in line and in check. And I personally feel that this was a long time coming, and I'm finally glad that Do Kwon will get his day in court.
Yeah, I'm really interested by it because I think there's like specific choices he made that make this more like fraud, but I don't think. Like, I was never a fan of UST and Terra. I interviewed Do Kwon on this YouTube channel. I thought he was a jerk, but like the actual UST mechanic was public and out there. It was sort of everything around surrounding the mechanic that was fraud. So I think both sort of things are true. Is that it was a failed experiment, but there was also fraud. Like, I will link the full indictment below in the description so you can read it yourself. But basically, it talks about how Do Kwon, sort of defrauded investors, and talked about how much the Chai network was in use when really no one ever really used it. And he definitely exaggerated a lot. I think he was a jerk publicly, which sort of makes him a much easier target. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm curious if he gets sent back to the U.S. or South Korea. You can see here both are trying to extradite him. So we'll see. Definitely going to be an interesting couple of years. I'm sure it's going to take a while, but we'll be following along. For the next piece to cover, I think we should talk about the Arbitrum Airdrop.
So I typically, most of these airdrops, sometimes kind of, if I can get in early, dump them. In the case of both Optimism and Arbitrum, I just couldn't be bothered to actually um, do the dump and then the rebuy at the bottom or the LP strategy.
Yeah.
That's just my personal direction. But what I do feel really happy about is just the kind of the sizing of what the Arbitrum airdrop kind of created for itself. It's now one of the top 40 tokens in the ecosystem, which feels about right for how mature the project is, how advanced some of the technology is, and kind of its trajectory into kind of scaling the Ethereum roadmap. So overall, really, really happy with how the Arbitrum kind of like price action went. It doesn't seem to be too radical. It seems, I mean, besides the fact that it started off at 5 and went to 1, it seems fairly flat over a period of time, which kind of indicates that there is some support behind it, and there is some kind of momentum to make sure that the project token survives. And overall, I think people are, now that the kind of storm of the airdrop has died out, and we're now going to go into like the build phase, this token having a market value and a treasury and a DAO behind it will really just, as we said last week, turbocharge the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the network basically freezing up for the first? Well, I think their website, the front end was attacked, but then the Arbitrum network itself was down for at least a few hours. I think at least 3 or so. What are your thoughts on that? Does that at all disprove the scaling? I mean, this happened to Optimism. I can't recall. But I mean, it's happened to a lot of other L2s that have launched, from my understanding. Certainly Optimism. Does that disprove anything? Does that show these networks aren't really
not at all? Not at all. It realistically proves it to its nth degree, right? Blockchains have block space. L2s also have block space. People want to kind of like have their transactions get into the next block as quickly as possible, especially when you're claiming airdrops and knowing that the price action is going to go down because you're going to get a whole bunch of dumping. This is a front running opportunity for many people. And so in those cases of high spike demand, they work as exactly as intended. The whole goal of scaling Ethereum is that we can have more of these types of airdrops where the capacity behind being able to claim and actually having your transaction finalized is the whole concept. But even at points of super high demand, we're going to have some sort of blockages, and that's actually it's unless the kind of claiming mechanisms is a slow drip or we find a different distribution mechanism, we're always going to have this sort of like demand at the point of drop. In terms of the front end being hacked, or I don't know if it actually got DDoSed or what the end result of that is. I'll have to check into that, but that's ultimately the reason why I never had the opportunity to dump my tokens, because I couldn't even get to the website. I know you and I personally and the rest of our team were kind of slacking each other on the side, trying to go directly to the contract, and that's eventually how we all got our tokens claimed. But by that time, kind of doing anything on an AMM would have not been worth it. So that's ultimately, the DDoS actually helped save me from becoming an LP in the Arbitrum pools.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I agree with most of everything you said. It is interesting how these airdrops, they always start out at wacky high prices. Like, yeah, we were in our company Slack frantically all trying to see if we could claim and sell our tokens because, at $5, we all love Arbitrum, obviously. I'm a large user of it. That's why I got the airdrop. It's just at $5, I mean, that's a $50 billion FDV, like a quarter of ETH. It's sort of a no-brainer to sell it. And I always wonder how these tokens start at these crazy high prices. I mean, I've heard the cynical take that like insiders, project teams, those connected to the project sort of start LPing at a high price to, anchor the valuation a little bit higher. I don't really buy that because they're just, the market's going to do what it's going to do. They're just going to lose that value. But yeah, I think everyone in the world was that had the airdrop was trying to sell it here. And I think only really sophisticated actors were able to. So don't feel bad that you missed this. I think we're all feeling it. It's always amazes me how quickly these airdrops get claimed. I always had thought like, you might have used Arbitrum a year ago, but maybe because of the bear market, you fell off the chain, you stopped doing things, you forgot about your crypto wallet. But you can see that like 76 or 77 basically percent of all users have already claimed. You can see only 14% are unclaimed, which is kind of crazy, right? I mean, that's a ton of people that are claiming. I'm really shocked by that. I thought it would be closer to 70%, and like the other 30% would just never claim because they fell off the chain or they lost their key or something. So this was cool to see that folks are engaged, and I think, yeah, to your point, this means things have sort of stabilized. There's less forced selling just because we're not all getting this free money that we have to figure out what to do with.
I also think tying into that number is the actual criteria the Arbitrum team chose for their airdrop distribution and what qualified you. Ultimately, it was money on the chain, usage over time, and value of usage. And if you're going to kind of like pick those types of users at the end of the day, those are your typical active users that know what's going to happen, that's ultimately very tuned into the ecosystem. And so having such a high claim rate is completely in line with the fact that Arbitrum chose a good distribution to distribute towards. That 14%, I honestly think, is users that have multiple wallets that forgot that they used a wallet in a previous life or lost the key to something, lost the key to that wallet. And so having a really high number on that fact really just goes to show that the Arbitrum team's selection criteria was really aligned with what they said in many of their interviews, saying that they wanted to have the airdrop go to recipients that will have stake in the game for actually enhancing the Arbitrum mission.
It's funny. I actually very much disagree with you there. I mean, I don't think they did a bad job selecting addresses, but they didn't do what I would have done. So I just pulled up this article, and I'm sure if you guys are active, you've seen these Twitter videos of basically like an airdrop farm, like claiming they have like 100 different claim pages open on one desktop, and they've got 20 screens. You can see here there's this Cointelegraph article that one user had 1,500 addresses that they used to farm $3.3 million of ARB. Obviously, that's sort of like small in the grand scheme of things, but it's really not just this. I will post this link to this thread below that just shows like a handful of Sybil farmers or Sybil airdrop hunters like really got a huge amount of the airdrop. That was a conscious choice by Arbitrum. We talked a little bit about that last week. It's not the choice I would have made, but they obviously weighed the pros and cons and decided that was right for them. So, any closing thoughts there, Chandler?
Yeah, Sybil attackers and airdrop farmers and even LPs in some cases are all trying to maximize their own utility. I think it's really hard to differentiate a user from a Sybil farmer, and there are some sophisticated tools that you can use. But at the end of the day, I think these farmers found a way to game the system. That's great. They got just over $3 million. And I think as new types of airdrops come out in the near future, we're gonna get even more sophisticated in making sure that differentiate users between what's an individual user and what's a farm. I realistically think that figuring out that 1,500 addresses all belong to one person is, no matter how sophisticated your tool is going to be hard. And we only found this out after the fact, right? Like this one user actually consolidated all those funds, and that's the only way that we detected that. And that's, you can't really figure that out beforehand. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a really hard problem to solve. And I think, any new airdrop and token creator will take that into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice transition to talking about zkSync. So if you guys don't know, on the 24th, that was just a few days ago now, I think that would have been on Friday, the day after the Arbitrum launch, zkSync announced that the zkSync Era Mainnet Alpha is live and now open to users. I think there's a few apps you can use. I think there's an exchange now. There might be a couple others. Obviously, it's still very early, but you probably noticed a lot of your favorite projects posted this sort of rectangle shape here, basically indicating that they're going to, deploy to, or they have an intention to deploy to zkSync Era Mainnet Alpha. Obviously, this is very exciting for our ecosystem. It's coming at an interesting time just because Arbitrum is sort of stealing the show right now. They're the go-to scaling solution. They just launched their token. So I thought it was funny and kind of bold that they announced this the day after. but it's really exciting. It's awesome. I think zkSync already announced that they're going to do a token, or they sort of hinted at how they're going to decentralize the project. And we talked about this last week. We saw a lot of activity moving to zkSync to sort of potentially farm that airdrop. Yeah, want to talk about that a bit, Chandler?
Yeah, absolutely. L2 season is in full swing. And I think the fact that the Arbitrum Airdrop and then the zkSync alpha announcement, coming fairly close together is by no means an accident. These teams, do necessarily have conversations, but I feel like, timing it really just kind of like gets a lot of mind share into the space for what L2s can achieve. I've personally been really a big fan of the zkSync team over some time. I've been chatting to a few of their team members in various different cities, and really enjoy the way that they approach their development and the way that they think about things. And they're really great with engaging on various topics. Just to kind of like give people and the listeners a sense of what this actual announcement means. This just simply means that the zk EVM has launched an alpha. I would not recommend putting a large amount of funds. Put a small amount of funds that you're willing to play around with, and naturally, because the number of projects that are going to be deploying are going to increase over time, we're going to see a fully fledged ecosystem grow over a short period of time. But even until it gets that alpha moniker out, we can kind of think of this as a test net phase for the entire zk EVM. That being said, and kind of tying back to the way that the the Matter Labs team, the team behind the zk EVM, are thinking about things, they've actually had a public testnet out for over a year, with decent number of transactions coming out of them. At least just under $4 million worth of audits from some of the top audit teams. So they've really gone and spent a lot of time in this alpha. So I personally think that this is one of the more polished alphas that we've seen. That's my suspicion and my expectation. Let the entire ecosystem kind of like test them, and boy, will they test them, with the Arbitrum Airdrop being a hype cycle that ties into a lot of people throwing funds into this ecosystem, basically willy-nilly going just like, all right, we're going to throw some funds into the zk EVM to kind of farm a future airdrop. I expect the zk EVM to be fully tested and seeing how it performs. Very exciting team behind a very exciting project, and really excited to see what happens with the zk EVM.
So I know you shared another link that I'm going to share in just a second, but one other thing I wanted to talk about this was, so I got a pretty decent Arbitrum airdrop. I think I shared last week it was like 6,750 or 7,000 tokens or something. Very happy with it. But at the same time, you're always sort of like kicking yourself, like, why didn't I use more addresses? Why didn't I have more involvement on Arbitrum? And every time you're going through this process of using something new, there's always the doubt in your mind of maybe I won't qualify, maybe there is no airdrop, because there's always been those rumors like, oh, Arbitrum's never going to do a token. This is, I think, the perfect example of it's still probably very early. We don't know how they're going to distribute their token. We basically know for 100% certainty that they're going to have one. All the incentives are aligned there. They have to sort of decentralize their mechanics. And so just use it, I would say. Just use the platform. Now is the best time to start. It's going to be more and more accessible over the coming weeks to bridge over, try some applications. And in a year, you'll probably thank yourself. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but if you stay involved with the ecosystem, you could potentially qualify for the largest classification of airdrop. And in this industry, for me, like one of the highest areas of return has just been testing everything out and getting amazing airdrops. I think the best one was the Ribbon Finance airdrop. That was sort of crazy in the peak of the hype cycle. There's Optimism, Arbitrum, Uniswap. I mean, there's been so many. Looking back at my tax returns, you can actually make you could have made a living the past 3 years off airdrops alone. So I can't stress enough, it feels like you're late to the party, but you're really not. There's zkSync, there's Scroll, there's going to be Starkware. There's so many different chains and apps that you could try. And I mean, really just try everything. It can almost be like, a full income for a lot of people. So with that, you shared this other link, Chandler. Want to walk us through this?
Yeah, so just tying to your last point earlier, I think this industry is one that really rewards people that partake in the ecosystem. It's kind of been perverted with the the scaling of like how many farming opportunities there are and Sybil attackers. But still, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, if you're not that kind of person and you just want to try some stuff and you want to play around, you will be rewarded for your participation in
Yeah.
this ecosystem. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's street credibility with your peers, but ultimately, at the end of the day, crypto is very much focused on that community element, and we will always have that kind of ethos grow as kind of the different technology um, stacks evolve and kind of create
Yeah.
new types of products.
Actually,
But
one quick thing to add to that is I keep forgetting to mention this, but like the regulatory reason behind airdrops is pretty clear to me. So if you're a US based team, and let's face it, like a lot of projects are, obviously you can't do an ICO, right? I mean, maybe you can through like CoinList, but it's tricky. You basically can't do an ICO. So that's out. You can't sell your token. You have to sort of find a way to distribute it in a decentralized way where, it's not just in the control of the team, because you need to be able to prove potentially someday that you're not controlling the network. It's truly decentralized. We didn't sell these tokens. We're not forcing anyone to buy them, blah, blah, blah. We're not advertising anything. And if you start to go down that path of thinking about how do you distribute a token without selling it to people, well, what do? I mean, you airdrop it. That's how you give out 10% of your token supply, 20%, and you get the community involved, and then you get governance proposals, and then you have a case for yourself that this is decentralized. You're not making an investment when you buy your token. It's not a security, etc. So I know I've been ranting on that, but that's my little speech there. I'll pass it back to you to talk about this doc.
yeah, sure. So if you're sitting here thinking, "Hey, I don't know how to get started with building on zk on the Era zk EVM," well, here's exactly a great example of what you can do. So under their doc sites, under the developer docs, in the tutorial section, they've got a bunch of examples here. I personally went through the cross-chain governance tutorial, where you can basically have a contract that's on L2 that receives an execution from L1. If that sounds kind of all complicated and you're just trying something out, they've got the code snippets here for you, and they lay it out in a really, really simple way. Just like if Justin can stake with the one,
Well, we'll see. I haven't done it yet.
his DApp node. And if I can do this, because I'm not a developer, if I can do this, then anyone in the ecosystem can. So I highly recommend going through this. If this is a bit too advanced for you, they also have a quick start guide on just getting yourself set up. It's a really, really well written out set of documentation. And this whole idea of cross-chain governance, there's also an account abstraction. And there's a bunch of examples here that I think are just really, really like interesting use cases. I personally have been playing around in the L2 L1 bridging space for a while, and so this was a personally interesting one for me. And yeah, it really helps anyone that's done a Solidity course to take it one step further and actually start building cross-chain elements. And so what I would recommend for anyone that is interested in doing this, it's a great way to just kind of like get started, do something in the zk EVM space, and see what happens from that point. And if the bug bites, then and you can become a full-time developer on that chain. One thing I do know, tying it back to the airdrop side of things, that many of the teams building in these ecosystems are the biggest receivers of actual airdrop rewards.
Cool. So the last thing we wanted to talk about was the situation with Coinbase and the SEC. So if you don't know, I'm sure you've seen, but about 5 days ago on the 22nd, Coinbase received a Wells notice, basically alleging that Coinbase broke securities regulations in the US. I've read the Wells notice. I'll share a link below. Obviously, it's like a very, it's like a lightning rod in our industry. Coinbase is sort of the bastion of the people that are trying to do things right. You can even see that with the tokens they list, right? There's some tokens that we would love for there to be on Coinbase, but they just can't list it due to their rigorous process. And Coinbase has really come out pretty publicly against the SEC. I think they're really frustrated because, Coinbase was allowed to go public, I think, was it 1 or 2 years ago now? Somewhere between 1 to 2 years ago. The SEC explicitly said that the Coinbase exchange was okay, that their process for determining what was a security and what wasn't, which is notably quite rigorous, was fine. And they let the company go public, and now they're suing Coinbase, which is impacting investors that are investing through an SEC stamped of approval public market. You can see the Wells notice makes mention of Coinbase Earn, Coinbase Prime, Coinbase Wallet, which is really interesting. I think the Coinbase Exchange and the Coinbase Earn are probably like the most susceptible to regulations here. But we'll see. I'm really excited that Coinbase is willing to go to court to fight this. So I think this is actually pretty bullish because we're going to see some clarity for once, which is exciting. What are your thoughts, Chandler?
Yeah, this is by far the most interesting legal development for clarity in our entire industry. And I think if there was any team that was more prepared to go to court against the SEC, it is the Coinbase team. They've been spending millions of dollars trying to be compliant, trying to get some clarity, spending a lot of human resources just trying to like anticipate what the SEC wants. And their brand is that they're the goody two shoes in the industry, and I think this is exactly the kind of person or entity that I would want to go up against in SEC. If I were the person that's going to be the lead prosecutor at the SEC, I would be very nervous about that court case. The kind of like narrative battle in terms of what's going to happen in this case is where I think it's kind of interesting where the industry that the SEC is regulating against Coinbase are going to be against the SEC, where it's actually it's not in the betterment for the industry what the SEC is doing at the moment. And so I think from a position that the SEC is in right now, it's actually very likely that they might lose this case. Obviously, depending on how everything transpires. But the other thing that I kind of wanted to do from an anecdotal experience from my side is that we often think that the regulators are these omnipotent, all-seeing, able to do anything type of entities. At least that's the expectation many people put on them. In my time before I even got into the DeFi system, I was at a centralized exchange where I did interface with a bunch of regulators and realized that they are just as kind of new to the industry. Everything's kind of like they're not exactly well in tune with some of the elements. They have a very stiff rule book that they have to play against, and the whole concept of innovation really does rub against regulators' ability to enforce often. And we saw that with fintech a little while ago. We've seen it with crypto now, and I think we'll continue to see this as we grow this industry and as more precedents get set within the industry. I think that this court case will be the one I will follow the most, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out. The other last thing I would want to say around this is that do not expect a short resolution. Actually, if a short resolution is in place, that's actually going to be negative to us in the industry. I expect this court battle to take years in some estimates, maybe multiple years. That just means that a lot of arguments get had, a lot of rebuttals get had, and a lot of like to and fro between Coinbase and the SEC in court, and that ultimately hashes out all the kind of points that are really important for this case, and ultimately that will benefit everyone that wants to be compliant in this industry, because it'll force the SEC to actually put a clear set of rules behind the crypto industry at large, and I think that'll be a net benefit. So I think the entire industry is very much behind Brian and the SEC, not the SEC, behind the Coinbase team, and I think we're going to see kind of a watershed moment for our industry.
Yeah. I very much agree with your sentiment that you're sort of alluding these regulators aren't bad people. I agree with you. I mean, they're doing their job. They're trying. I actually believe that they are trying to do their best to protect investors. And if you're not following our industry as closely as we are, and you're not actually doing things on chain, you're just seeing things like Terra, FTX, Binance's shadiness, Gemini. I mean, there's like an infinite number of examples we could point to over the past 2 years. They're clearly behind, right? They're like 2 years behind on things. They're clearly not doing what we want, what we'd like to see ideally. But I do try to give the SEC the benefit of the doubt that they're would ideally like to see the best outcome. But yeah, it strikes me as crazy they're going after Coinbase, who's notoriously been the best actor or one of the best actors in this space. They've been rigorous about everything. They've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. The one thing you allude to is this is the best case for us that, or not us, but the best case for crypto that we have, a good chance of winning. The one thing, I agree with you, but the one thing I don't get is the SEC has a lot more information than us. They know the law better than us. And you would think they wouldn't do this if they didn't think they had a chance to win, because they know this is going to court, right? Like they know they met Coinbase something like 30 times over the last year to talk about this. So they knew Coinbase wasn't going to settle. And so for the SEC to finally be saying let's do this in court means that, as much as we want this to go well, I think the future is still uncertain. So we'll see. But the last thing I wanted to point out was Brian just tweeting that the SEC Wells notice has caused a noticeable boost in morale. I think this is going to be like a rallying cry for, our industry supporting Coinbase. I know we're not as into the centralized exchanges and centralized parties, but, we should all be rallying around Coinbase and supporting them, because they do try their best. Obviously, they're not perfect, but they're pretty good to have as, leaders of the ecosystem. So with that, that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Any last words, Chandler?
Yeah, the morale is super high to support Coinbase. I'm personally going to be supporting them throughout the entire court process, following all the documentation, following all the recaps. I think the entire news industry is going to be doing that as well. And so I feel that this will be one of the most public enforcements for the industry at large. And I think we're going to have quite a galvanizing force of everyone behind that specific case. So really, really excited to see what happens. It is not, as you say, it is naturally a nerve-wracking outcome, but we're, if this were an easy fight, it wouldn't be worth it. And I think this is the most worth it fight we can actually take as an industry for what we believe in.
That's a great closing little statement there. If you're still watching this, that means you're like one of a small minority of people. And that means you're probably best suited to help us come up with a name for the podcast. So we've thrown out some ideas internally that are not sexy. I think we've said Block Party is a potential name, kind of fun, hip, maybe, maybe not. And we've thrown out a few others, but we haven't landed on anything. We're not sold yet. So if you can think of any great names for the podcast, it would be a tremendous help. Drop them in the comments below. I read literally every comment. There's not too many yet, so we can handle that. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. We will see you next week. Potentially Chandler and I will be in person together, but we'll see. And yeah, with that said, have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.